Hello students, today we're going to be looking at our lesson, Conflict in the Greek World. We've talked a lot about how the Greek culture was really performing well. A lot of great things were happening in Greece, but Greece was not without drama, as is true of almost every culture we've studied. And today we're going to be looking at some of the biggest conflicts that really racked the Greek world during this time. This is chapter 4, section 3. So make sure you do have your notes out, you're ready to roll, and you have started a new section, but always make sure that your notes are all in the same document. So section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4, and section 5 should all be in one document. All right, I think we're ready to get started here. Our objectives for today is we're going to summarize how the Persian Wars affected Greece. In fact, the first day you're watching this video, you're only going to watch the part about the Persian Wars, and I'll tell you where to stop. The second day, we're going to talk about direct democracy and how the famous ruler of Athens, Pericles, really helped to encourage and get that started. That will be the second day you watch this video. And then finally, the third day you watch this video will be understanding the causes and the effects of the Peloponnesian War. These are just a few of the terms and people that you're going to be responsible for. As always, make sure that you have these written in your notes. A few more right here. Our focus question for today is, how did war with invaders and conflict among Greeks affect the city-states? So we're going to be looking at a few different kinds of conflicts. First of all, the conflicts with people outside of Greece, and also conflicts with Greek-to-Greek conflict, conflict between the Greek city-states themselves. So we will be looking at those different things and find an answer. All right, so the first conflicts that we're going to look at are the conflicts between the Greeks and the other superpower at the time, in fact, the superpower of the time, called the Persians. Now, earlier this year when we were studying Mesopotamia, we did study the Persian culture. And as we were studying the Persians, we had learned that the Persians were a dominant empire. In fact, the Persians created one of the world's largest empires. And at the time that we're talking about right now, when the Persians took on the Greeks, the Persians had successfully created the largest empire in history. The Persians really basically owned land all the way from India, basically up to where Greece was. And so a natural thing to do is to push it a little bit further. And so the Persians definitely had their eyes on the Greeks, but they definitely had their eyes on the Greeks when the Greeks did something that the Persians didn't appreciate. And that was, the Greeks had a colony called Ionia. And Ionia was right next to Persian territory. In fact, so close to Persian territory that the Persians took it over. Now, the majority of people living in Ionia were Greek people, because this was a colony. This was a place where the Greeks had transplanted some of their own people to Ionia. And because these people are in Ionia and they had just been conquered by the Persians, they asked the Greeks for help. They go over to Athens. They send people to Athens and they ask the Athens to help them. And the Athenians sent help to the Ionians. When the Persians found out that the Athenians sent help, that sealed the deal. Greece was going to be the next place that Persia tried to conquer. So the Persians invaded Athens. They did it by ship. The Persians had quite a navy. They had many, many boats. And so this is a map right here of kind of how it went down. The Persians came in, landed their boats on the shore right here near a place called Marathon, and with extremely large forces attacked the smaller army of the Greeks. Now, I could go into all the details right now of how that battle was fought, but I included a link in the directions on campus under the topics board, which has a video, a YouTube video that will show you how this battle was fought and how the Greeks were able to win. So I need you guys to make sure that you watch that video, because a very important part of being able to complete the activities for today is going to be the fact that you know how this Battle of Marathon was fought. Definitely an underdog story. The Greeks should not have been able to defeat this most powerful empire in the world, but they were able to because of some smart tactics. At the time, the Athenian leader was Themistocles. And he was confident, even though he won this battle and the Greeks won, he knew that this was not going to be the end with the Persians. He knew that the Persians would be back. And so the first thing he does is contacts other city-states, especially one that you would not expect, Sparta, who is typically an enemy of Athens. But he says, we have a chance here. We need to get together and join our forces to fight the Persians, or we will be destroyed. So Sparta, other Greek city-states, and Athens all begin to unite together to get ready for the inevitable attack by the Persians. Here's a picture that just kind of shows you the situation. Athens is located right here in the middle. Ionia was over here. This was Athenian territory. And the Persian Empire is over here. Of course, the Persian Empire goes all the way to the east, but this is the westernmost part of the Persian Empire. So you can see why the Persians would take over Ionia. Just makes sense. And Athens helping them caused the Persians to go over and attack Marathon. Well, as Themistocles predicted, the Persians were not done fighting, and they assembled a tremendously huge army that came down to Greece through land this time. They also sent boats, but a tremendously huge army of over 200,000 soldiers, 200,000 Persians, attacked Greece, and they started to come down from the top of Greece down into Greece, and their main objective was to destroy Athens, because Athens, of course, is the ones who made them look foolish by beating them. The Greeks came up with a plan. There was a narrow pass, and this is a pass right here. It was a narrow little gap that very few soldiers could fit through. And this gap continued for quite a while between the mountains. You know that one of the biggest advantages in Greece is that with all of these mountains and tricky territory, it's not going to be, the Persians aren't going to be able to make it to Athens quickly. It's going to take a while. And so the Spartan warriors volunteered to be the ones to try to slow down the Persians. There was no faking around with this, that the Spartans were going to be able to beat the Persians. The Persians had 200,000 soldiers. The Spartans had about 300. Yes, you heard that correctly. The Spartans had around 300 soldiers. The Persians, 200,000. Well, the Spartans put their 300 soldiers right in that gap at Thermopylae. And their intention was, their goal was to try to slow down the Persians, make it by a couple of days if possible, by a day or two, so that the Athenians and other Greeks had time to organize and get ready for the Persian army. The Spartans get up there, and amazingly enough, they're able to hold off 200,000 Persians for several days before they are all killed. And they were all killed. The Spartans all lost their life, but amazingly and boldly they fought for several days in this gap and were able to hold off 200,000 soldiers. How? Well, the gap is so narrow, only a few soldiers can face them at a time, and the Spartans fought like crazy. So even though this was a loss, technically for the Greeks, because the Persians killed every one of the Spartans, even though it was a loss, it really was a big victory because it bought the Athenians and Pericles, who was the leader of the Athenians, it bought them time to get ready for the Persian War. Here you can see, this is the route that the Persian army took. So the Persian army is coming down this way, and this is Thermopylae, and you can see how it's not that far away from Athens, and it's definitely close to Thebes. So what they wanted to do is hold them off, and they were successful at doing that. When the Persians defeated the Spartans, they saw an opportunity. They hurried down to Athens, only to be surprised that Athens was empty. The inhabitants had withdrawn. Basically, there was no one in Athens. Pericles, the leader of Athens, had convinced the Athenians to leave the city, leave it empty, and to try to take on the Persians at the sea. You see, Pericles knew that if he had any chance to beat the Persians at all, he had so many fewer soldiers, but he did maybe have an advantage on the water. The Athenians were famous and good at fighting on the water. So he's like, let's all leave, let's go down and try to find a place to fight near the water. Of course, the Persians, when they saw Athens deserted, they took full advantage of that. They looked at this as an opportunity to get back at Athens for what they had done to them at the Battle of Marathon, and they completely destroyed the city. Destroyed every building, every part of Athens, burned it to the ground. There was nothing left of Athens. Athens was just rubble after the Persian army was done with it. But of course, that took a little time to do that too, which also buys the Athenians a bit more time to get ready. That brings us to the big fight now. Now, if you look up here at the map, Athens is about 7 miles this way. And Pericles and the Athenians decided to set up the trap to hopefully beat the Persians here in this area of water. What they decided to do is hide all of their boats and forces behind this little peninsula right here, around this corner. The Persian fleet was basically parked here, ready to come in and take on the Spartans. However, being parked right here, they couldn't exactly see the Spartan boats yet. The next thing the Athenians do is they use a little trickery. They basically send a spy to the Persian king named Xerxes. They send a spy to him, and basically the spy says, hey, if you pay me money, I'll tell you what's up with the Greeks. Xerxes was always ready to get an advantage, so he says, sure. And he's like, oh, the Greeks, they're fighting against each other, they're disorganized, and they're right around that corner. All you need to do is go take them. Well, Xerxes bought it. He had actually heard rumors from his other spies that, maybe that was true. Maybe the Greeks were fighting amongst themselves. I mean, after all, Athens had just been burned to the ground. They probably are pretty mad. And that gave him his chance. So the Persian fleet, which actually had way more boats than the Greeks did, and the Persian boats were good too. They turned around the corner, ready to make their final fight, and they figured this would be their opportunity to take down Athens and the Greeks once and for all. However, as they turned the corner, this little area of water, is kind of narrow. So it's not like the Persians could keep their boats this wide. They had to kind of narrow them down a little bit. And what they found is the Athenians had all of their boats lined up in order and were ready to take them down. I'm not going to tell you too much more about the Battle of Salamis, which is what this is called. It's actually a sea battle, because again, there's a YouTube video that you need to watch which explains the Battle of Salamis in more detail. Make sure you watch that. That's going to help you to get your assignment done. So now, if you kind of do the math here, of course the Persians had lost at the Battle of Marathon. Then they came down and were able to beat the Spartans, even though the Spartans fought bravely. They were to beat the Spartans at Thermopylae. They came down, destroyed Athens completely. But now they're beat again at Salamis. Well, the Persians were defeated now on water. They had been defeated on land, but they still had a tremendously huge armed force on the land. The war's not over yet. However, the war is over now, because Xerxes, after his boats were defeated, he fled back to Persia, back to the area over here. He had to regroup. He didn't want to get himself killed, so he was able to escape in his boats. leaving his army, though, in Greece right here. Once he left his army in Greece, the Greeks rally around, defeat the Persian army of 200,000, and basically force them to flee back to Persia, back to Persian land, with their tails between their legs. At this point now, Greece has just officially shown the world that the Persians could be defeated, something that no one has ever been able to do before. This makes the Persians look weak, and it honestly makes the Greeks look extremely strong. The Greeks now basically stamp themselves as a superpower, as a powerful area, and from now on, the Greeks are looked at as one of the big powers in the world. Athens emerges after the war as being the most powerful of all the city-states. The leadership of Pericles was very strong. The Athenians had been a big part of winning this battle, and they become the most powerful. So, after this, a lot of the other city-states look to Athens to be the leader. And that makes a league called the Delian League. If you look at this map down here, you see there's a ton of yellow. Well, Athens is located right here. And Athens is located right up here. And you can see that all of these yellow areas all basically were in this alliance called the Delian League, which Athens led. Shows you how much power Athens had. All these different yellow areas basically all looked at Athens for leadership, and Athens was able to control basically all this different yellow territory. If you notice, there's one little area down here that's not necessarily yellow. It's not part of the Delian League, and that was because that was Sparta. Sparta was pretty much like the one city-state that didn't want to join the Delian League. Athens uses that leadership position to basically create an empire and started to dominate the other members of the Delian League. It was not equal. People did not have an equal say-so. My city-state didn't have the same power as Athens. Athens had the power. Of course, Athens didn't run its own city like an empire, though. During this time, Athens experienced what is called a golden age. Pericles was the leader of Athens during this time. And what I'm going to tell you here is Pericles really pushes this new form of government called a direct democracy. And this is going to be, if you haven't already figured this out, this is where we're going to end up starting our new lessons. So if you're continuing to watch the first day right now, you can stop. But today we're going to talk about direct democracy. And Pericles really started this direct democracy. He was an amazing statesperson, and he wanted to give rights to the people. He wanted to give the citizens of Athens, and we've already talked about who were citizens. It was men who were born in Athens, but these people could participate in government, even poor people. And the way he did this was creating an assembly. The assembly was able to make laws and discuss all the important decisions in Athens, and they were actually paid. This was kind of a new step towards direct democracy. He really wanted these people who were in the assembly to be able to do their job of government. And in order to do their job of government, they really had to stop working so they could focus on government. So paying your government workers with a stipend is kind of a new concept at this time. Athenians could also serve on a jury. This is another kind of new idea that the Greeks start, and especially during this golden age. And a jury is, of course, when a person is, convicted or accused of a crime. People make the decision on whether there's guilt or innocence. Not one judge or one king, but a group of peers. Now, today we have juries that consist of 13 people? But back at that time, the jury could consist of hundreds or thousands of Athenian citizens who would all come and listen to the case and decide on guilt and innocence. Kind of a new concept. Also, another thing that was part of this direct democracy is something called ostracism. This is going to seem really harsh, But every year, basically, the Greeks would have another big meeting where all the citizens could come in Athens. And every citizen would write on a piece of clay the name of someone they felt was potentially a threat to the democracy in Athens. Like, is there someone in Athens who's too powerful? Someone in Athens who might try to take over? And everybody would write the name of someone down, put it in a big, huge jar. All these names were collected. And if there happened to be a name that was overwhelmingly chosen, like a name that had the vast majority, that person was then ostracized, which means that person was kicked out of Athens for 10 years. So trying to be too powerful, trying to take too much power, trying to have your voice heard too much was actually a bad thing in Athens because it could get you kicked out of Athens for 10 years. And if you're wondering if this ever happened, absolutely, it happened a lot. There are many important Athenians who were actually ostracized for 10 years and had to leave the city and become sort of like an outcast because other Athenian citizens thought they were too powerful. During this age of Pericles, though, the most important thing to know is Athens was extremely prosperous. This direct democracy was making Athens click, things were going well, and if you remember, what had happened right before this? Athens was burned to the ground. And so Pericles uses this opportunity to put all Athenians to work. They have tons of money now, by the way. Tons of money because they've started this Delian League. They're in charge of all this empire. They're collecting taxes and making trades. Athens is making so much money, it's ridiculous. And they're putting all this money, Pericles is putting all this money into the city to make it the most beautiful and amazing city of the world. That's kind of leads us into right here. Athens becomes the cultural center of Greece. In other words, of course, with the Delian League, all these other city-states looking at Athens, Athens is the example that everyone looks to. Athens works on education, with philosophy and art being very important. The city increases in its prosperity. It's making money like crazy. Athens is becoming extremely rich, and they're using some of this money to give jobs to artisans and workers to build amazing structures, create amazing art, do plays and other things like that that makes Athens culture boom, and festivals to the gods. All these other things that make Athens really the place to be in the Greek world. This needs to be said, though, of course, not everybody is happy with this Athenian domination. And in case you are continuing to watch this video right now, this is where you would stop. This is going to be our third lesson off of this video. So not everyone is happy with Athenian domination. Athens has an enemy, a huge enemy, which is, of course, Sparta. And if you look down here, Athens still is represented. Athens and its allies, the Delian League, is still represented here in the yellow. And you can see quite a few allies all the way around the Aegean Sea here, all pledging their allegiance and loyalty to Athens. But if you compare this to the map we saw before, there's a lot more red now. Because Sparta, down here, while before there were just a little red dot, the one place that was holding out against Athens, now Sparta tries to find more and more city-states to say, you know what, are you really happy with how much power Athens is taking here? And more city-states started to agree they did not like Athens taking that kind of power and started to join the Peloponnesian League. This little part of Greece down here is called the Peloponnesus, and as you can see, almost every part of the Peloponnesus joined together against Athens, and also another very important area of north of Greece called Macedonia. So these two areas kind of joined together to fight against or stand up against Athens. So it didn't take long before a war broke out between the Peloponnesian League, which is led by Sparta, and the Delian League, which is led by Athens. This war broke out, and in 431 BC. It lasted 27 years. 27 years, a war. Now, something you need to understand, the Spartans knew they had not much of a chance to fight the Greeks on water, the Athenians on water. The Spartans were dominant on the land. So what the Spartans and the Peloponnesian League did is they basically surrounded the Athenian wall. And by this time, the Athenians had built this amazing wall. As you can see, Athens isn't right on the water, but Athens has a port that's about 7 miles away. Athens actually built a fortification wall all the way around their city and then connected this wall all the way down to the port. And the port, you're able to bring in boats right in here and right in here and even a little bit right in here, and you'll be able to bring in boats and basically supply the city. The Spartans didn't have the boats to compete with the Athenians. So basically what the Spartans decided to do is surround the city. And they did for 27 years. Yes, this is how did the Athenians survive being surrounded for 27 years? Well, it's easy. They were actually even able to be successful for quite a long time during this 27 years. They didn't want to really go outside the walls and try to defeat the Spartans on land. That's not going to be very successful. But they were able to continue to resupply their city through boats. Boats could go out. They could, the boats could go out and still make trades, still do things with other allies, bring in supplies, and resupply Athenians with food and products that they needed. However, that only lasted so long. After a while, the money started to run out in Athens. Athens doesn't really have anything to trade with anymore. Athens can't go out here and grow any crops. Disease and sickness starts to spread in Athens, and the Spartans really start to gain the upper hand. All right, so Sparta, it's not going well for the Athenians. Sparta's surrounded Athens. Athens isn't doing too well. The people of Athens are tired. They're starving. They really have no way of bringing in food and supplies anymore. And worst of all, they're starting to get sick. It's interesting this time of pandemic where, a tenth of a hundredth of a percent of the people in our country are dying and we're freaking out. Well, back in those times, 1/4 of the people in Athens died from the pandemic that was spreading through Athens. 1 out of every 4 people died from disease. And there was really no way to stop it. You couldn't spread out. You couldn't go into the fields, go into the surrounding area to get away from the disease. You were locked in. And this, of course, made it even worse. And if you don't have food, it's hard to recover from a disease. Athens was out of choices. After this long, prolonged battle with the Spartans, they finally surrendered in 404 BC. And this basically ended the age of democracy. Sparta now was kind of the big dog in Greece. And you might think, okay, well, the Greeks are going to continue their domination now under the Spartans instead of the Athenians. But the thing about Sparta was that really wasn't their deal. Sparta for a while tried to, kind of control a lot of different city-states, but really the Spartans weren't great at that. They were great at fighting, but they really weren't great at ruling. And so Greek domination starts to decline, kind of go back to city-states again, and the city-states weren't as powerful. So it's kind of a sad ending to the whole story of this really amazing time of the golden age of Athens and Greece. All right, that's about it that we've got here for this whole presentation. Make sure you're completing your activities and your notes that go along with it. Also, look back to the topics board and make sure that you have watched the different video clips that go along with this. All right, that's it.